enforcement will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to allow members to examine the travel patterns of individuals linked to foreign terrorist organizations and how these individuals make their way to our nation's borders. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning and welcome to this joint hearing. It's no secret that our nation is in the midst of a dire crisis at our nation's borders. Over the last 4 years, a record number of migrants from across the globe have descended on our borders and created security challenges our nation has never experienced. Specifically, border encounters in the Biden administration have surpassed 10.1 million illegal aliens encountered nationwide, with over 8.2 million encountered along the southwest border. These are only the number of individuals encountered at one of our borders. Experts estimate that nearly 2 million individuals have evaded arrest by CBP officials and are known to be gotaways. The most glaring statistic that alarms me and this subcommittee, the two subcommittees that are here, is that 382 individuals whose names appear on the terror watch list were stopped trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border illegally between ports of entry from fiscal year 2021 to date. This is compared to the 11 individuals apprehended between 2017 and 2020, 11. If we know that nearly 2 million individuals are considered gotaways, how many of these individuals also appear on the terror watch list? We're not only discussing and debating this issue here at home. In March, I led a bipartisan congressional delegation trip to North Africa and Middle East. We heard from a variety of our foreign partners and entities within the United States government on this topic. One issue that alarmed all of us on this trip was the nature in which foreign terrorist networks are utilizing criminal smuggling networks to help facilitate their travel from the Middle East and Central Asia to the Western Hemisphere. These elaborate smuggling operations are utilizing both commercial and private means to coordinate this travel. This smuggling network was also highlighted in Director Wray's testimony during the Senate Intelligence Committee's annual Worldwide Threats Assessment hearing. Specifically, he stated, and I quote, "There is a particular network where some of the overseas facilitators of the smuggling network have ISIS ties that we're very concerned about, and that we've been spending an enormous amount of time with our partners to investigate," end quote. His acknowledgement of this threat shows the gravity and seriousness of the threat, which is why we are here today. Today's hearing will examine irregular migration trends and the travel patterns that have been utilized by individuals who appear on the terror watch list. Initially, we requested the Department of Homeland Security to participate in today's conversation, but our requests were rejected by the department. For a department that was born out of the aftermath of 9/11, it is deeply disturbing that they will not come to this committee to discuss terror threats to the United States and how this administration's policies have created the threat environment that every American is now living under. I do not know why DHS has refused to participate today and provide answers to the American public. However, my best guess is that the Biden-Harris administration is attempting to hide from the public and not take accountability for their policy failures. I have full faith that the American people are smarter than this and that accountability for this administration's failures will be upheld. Thankfully, we do have a distinguished panel here today that can share their expertise and experiences in their respective roles. I know that they will provide valuable testimony to help answer the questions that the Biden-Harris administration refuses to answer. With that, I yield back. I'd now like to recognize the ranking member of the Counterterrorism, Law Enforcement, and Intelligence Subcommittee, the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have real challenges at the border and real challenges facing our country when it comes to meeting the threat of terrorism. Unfortunately, too many of my Republican colleagues have chosen to put politics over securing our border and protecting the American people. When the Biden administration worked with Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats to reach a bipartisan solution to secure the southern border, unfortunately, too many of my Republican colleagues chose to kill that deal because President Trump made it clear directly to members of the congressional Republican leadership and through his proxies in the media that he felt it would be better for him politically if the problem went unsolved. The bipartisan border agreement negotiated between the Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats, and the Biden-Harris administration included new presidential emergency authority to shut down the border when it became overwhelmed. It would have raised the standard for migrants to qualify for asylum and empower border officials to rapidly turn away those who fail to meet that standard. It would have included funding for more than 1,500 new Customs and Border Protection personnel, an additional 4,300 asylum officers to make the asylum process faster and fairer, and would have increased the number of detention beds to alleviate those facilities that are currently over capacity. It is for this reason that the union that represents more than 18,000 Border Patrol officers endorsed the President's plan. And it is why it is so unfortunate that too many of my colleagues on the other side chose to put Donald Trump's political ambitions ahead of securing the border and keeping the American people safe. The American people are clear about what they want. They want us to put bipartisan partnership over politics. They want us to work together to solve our challenges at the border and to keep the American people safe in a collaborative, bipartisan basis, and to reject the hyperpartisanship that has been the hallmark of the 118th Congress. My hope is that today's hearing will be a step in the right direction toward bipartisanship, that we can renew our progress working together to secure the border and reject Donald Trump's hyperpartisanship, where he puts himself time and time again over the best interests of the American people. I will also note for the record that the Department of Homeland Security did agree to come and address these committees on this topic, but asked to do it in a secure setting given the sensitive nature of the subject matter, and that request was rejected. With that, I will yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the Border Security Enforcement and Enforcement Subcommittee, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. This hearing has been rescheduled a few different times, and for that I'm appreciative for your kindness and your accommodation. We appreciate your participation and look forward to receiving your testimony. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the rise in illegal immigration from regions outside of the Western Hemisphere. We will assess the serious damage caused by the Biden-Harris open border policies, which have a direct impact on the national security of the United States. We'll hear expert insights into the connections between individuals on the terror watch list and special interest aliens migrating illegally to the United States at record levels. We will examine the national security consequences, including increased threat exposure at and within our borders stemming from these illegal migration trends. Finally, we will discuss potential legislative and policy measures necessary to strengthen border security and address national security concerns. Fulfilling the committee's important oversight responsibilities is what we're here to accomplish, and to remedy DHS's failures is what we envision. The Biden-Harris administration's self-inflicted border crisis has resulted in record-breaking illegal immigration, and as a result, the country is facing an unprecedented internal threat, a threat to the homeland from within the homeland. That's why we're here today. By ending the effective Trump-era policies and programs that protected us and secured our border, the Biden-Harris administration has seemingly intentionally left us vulnerable to potential attacks from terrorists and criminals who are freely moving around our communities. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, since fiscal year 2021, 382 aliens on a terror watch list have been caught illegally crossing our southwest borders. My sources report that they estimate over 2,000 have actually crossed into our country. At least 99 illegal aliens on a watch list were released into the United States by DHS between fiscal years 2021 and 2023. These are the numbers that are acknowledged that we know of by DHS. And that's not all. According to many media reports, the Department of Homeland Security has identified over 400 illegal aliens from Central Asian countries and elsewhere who crossed into the United States via an ISIS-affiliated human smuggling network. We have to get some of this data from open media sources, because the DHS obstructs our inquiries. They stand in the way, in many cases, again and again, from this committee's legitimate oversight authority to ask them about what's going on. 8 individuals from Tajikistan were arrested on immigration charges in the United States following the discovery of ties to terrorism. These 8 suspected terrorists were able to fool CBP and freely enter the United States without any issue. In fact, at least one of these individuals used the CBP One app to enter the country. Lately, it seems stories like this almost daily. Yet the Biden-Harris administration continues to make it easy for unvetted illegal immigrants to cross our border and live and work in the United States across every community in every sovereign state. This is what we're dealing with. How many more suspected terrorists or actual terrorists are part of the nearly 2 million known gotaways who are most likely living in your community? No one knows. I pray we don't find out the hard way. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this hearing. I yield.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Border Security and Enforcement Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Pfluger, and I welcome our witnesses here today for this most important hearing. Let me take a moment, though, to condemn the assassination attempt, 2 now, on former President Trump. Clearly, there is no room for political violence in our democracy. And as a member of the bipartisan House Task Force on the attempted assassination of former President Trump, I'm committed to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make sure we get to the bottom of what went wrong and to develop solutions to make sure that none of our presidential candidates are in harm's way. We want to make sure the voters of America choose who the next president is and not an assassin's bullet. And now let's talk about today's hearing, the topic, which is terrorism. I take terrorism, the threat, seriously. I remember all too well 9/11, and that's why the Department of Homeland Security was created and why this committee was committed as well. And we all care deeply about making sure that similar attacks on our soil do not repeat themselves. But to stop these attacks, we start with the facts. The word terrorism is thrown around a lot, so it's important to define what is terrorism. Terrorism involves the threat of use of violence by non-state actors to achieve political, economic, religious, or social goals. Within this understanding, the data shows that most terrorist activity is conducted by United States citizens and not immigrants. Let me repeat. Most terrorist activity conducted in the U.S. is by U.S. citizens. In fact, a study by the Cato Institute found that from 1975 to the year 2022, the number of people murdered or injured by terrorist attacks on U.S. soil by foreign-born immigrants, 0. Let me repeat. Study by the Cato Institute found that from 1975 to 2022, the number of people murdered or injured by terrorist attacks on U.S. soil by foreign-born undocumented immigrants was 0. However, DHS and FBI regularly tell us that one of the greatest terrorism threats we have is domestic terrorism. Domestic terrorism. And sadly, we can highlight far too many cases of domestic terrorism, radical and ethically motivated extremism that cause death and injury in this country. And just this past week, we've seen at least 33 bomb threats that have shut down schools in Springfield, Ohio. Elementary schools were evacuated again early this week. The Ohio State Highway Patrol has been deployed to monitor these schools. And this has been fueled by our former president spreading baseless rumors about migrants eating much-loved pets in those communities. Fortunately, there have not been any injuries yet, but the danger is real. Fear-mongering for political purposes has real consequences. And yet, we have not had one hearing in this committee during this entire Congress to address domestic violence or extremism. Mr. Chairman, members, we are not minimizing the threat of terrorism. It is real and it requires our focus, but clearly we need to defend our citizens, our taxpayers, from all terrorist attacks that would harm our citizens. And yes, Mr. Chair, we have a challenge at the southern border. And as I've said before, this is not just a U.S. problem. This is a we problem of a global challenge. And right now, we are essentially witnessing the largest mass movement of people this world has ever seen. And clearly, there are potential threats to our national security, and we must take action to prevent any of these possible threats from becoming real or materialized. Here in this committee, General John Kelly, former Secretary of Homeland Security, and the former Chief of Staff to former President Trump would say, and I'll paraphrase him, Homeland Security does not start or end at the border. And if a threat reaches our borders, then we're too late. We must exercise our collaboration with our global partners to stop these threats from even coming close to our border. And our homeland experts have continuously said that our border should not be our first line of defense. And I'm proud that we've made progress on anti-terrorism measures. Some of these partnerships have actually yielded positive results. Since Biden's executive order took effect in June, temporary suspending entry of non-citizens across the southern border, migrant encounters with the Border Patrol have dropped 55%, reducing the threat of bad actors from entering into this country. But all of us know there's so much more to be done. We need more resources to deal with the situation at the border, address the root causes of migration, and stop individuals who pose a threat to our national security from entering our country. And I call on my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, let's work across the aisle, hopefully with the Senate as well, to expand legal pathways to come to the U.S. so CBP can focus their attention on the real threats we have at the border. And we do have the need for additional resources, not less. Let me thank our witnesses for being here today. I look forward to hearing your testimony regarding the threats at the border and opportunities that we may have to strengthen our national security. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I yield.
The gentleman yields. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic, and I ask that the witnesses please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Our first witness, Dr. Kelly Brown, is a retired U.S. combat veteran, Army combat veteran, and highly respected leader with nearly 30 years of success managing high-performing joint military and international government teams. As an aviator, strategist, and force manager, she has extensive experiences across multiple disciplines, including the continuity of government, national contingency operations, homeland security, emergency management, disaster response, and aviation operations. Her wide-ranging military career includes service in the President's Emergency Operations Center at the White House, Senior Military Fellow for the Chief of Staff of the Army Strategic Studies Group, and Military Advisor for U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the Department of Homeland Security. Her combat experience includes deployments in support of our Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. Thank you for your service to our nation and welcome. Our second witness, Mr. Timothy Healy serves as the Director of National Security for Buchanan and Edwards, an award-winning technology leader creating transformative solutions for the government. In Mr. Healy's prior roles, he served as the Director of the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center, where he led efforts to consolidate and coordinate the U.S. government's approach to terrorism screening and facilitate the sharing of terrorism information that protects the nation and our foreign partners while safeguarding civil liberties. In addition, Mr. Healy has served as president of ICON LLC, a company focused on serving the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, federal and state law enforcement, and intelligence communities. Thank you for your service to the country. And our third witness, Mr. Alex Nowrasteh, who serves as Vice President for Economic and Social Study Policies at Cato Institute. His work has been featured in prominent publications like the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and the Washington Post, amongst others. He is a frequent guest on television and radio programs, including Fox, MSNBC, Bloomberg, and NPR. In the academic realm, his research has been published in peer-reviewed journals such as the World Bank Economic Review, the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, Public Choice, and the Journal of Bioeconomics. He has also contributed chapters to various edited volumes, and thank you for your service and being here as well. I thank all the witnesses. We're going to allow an opening statement. I know that you have a lot of information. Please summarize it to 5 minutes. We have your written statements, and then we'll get into the question and answer period. The chair now recognizes Dr. Brown for your opening statement of 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, ranking members, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify about Homeland Security consequences of illegal immigration. In January 2015, I was assigned to the Department of Homeland Security as a military advisor. When President Trump directed the Secretary of Defense to support DHS in securing the southern border, my role within DHS drastically changed from that of a routine military advisor to that of a border crisis specialist. From April 18 to January 21, I served as a national expert for translating law enforcement requirements into military capabilities. The border security system implemented from April 18 to January 21 consisted of agents, detection technologies, physical barriers such as the wall, federal and state government cooperation, military support, and federal policies working in synchronized harmony to support federal law, discourage illegal immigration, and expeditiously remove illegal aliens. Border agents were focused on securing the border and preventing illegal entry. In January 21, that border security system was intentionally dismantled. Construction of physical barriers, such as the wall, were halted, military support was significantly reduced, federal policies of previous administration were revoked, and pull factors were increased. Border agents' focus was intentionally shifted from securing the border and preventing illegal entry to processing illegal aliens as quickly as possible. Since 2021, 9.5 million known illegal aliens, more than the entire population of Israel and just under that of Hungary, have illegally entered the United States. The extent of the illegal immigration is not limited to a handful of nations, the southwest border, or a particular race or religion. Not including the United States, there are 194 countries in the world. Since the beginning of this fiscal year, illegal aliens from 172 countries have entered the United States. As the committee well knows, the State Department has designated Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Syria as state sponsors of terrorism. So far, this fiscal year, over 14.5 thousand known illegal aliens have entered the United States from these 4 countries. While we usually focus on the vast number of illegal aliens entering the United States via the southwest border, it is important not to lose focus on the northern border. In FY20, illegal alien apprehensions on the northern border totaled 2.2 thousand. So far, this fiscal year, illegally alien apprehensions on the northern border total nearly 23,000. That's an 800% increase. These aren't just Canadians heading south to escape the cold. These illegal aliens come from countries such as India, Romania, Russia, and China, just to name a few. The influx of illegal aliens is so significant, Border Patrol agents are unprecedentedly being surged to the northern border. Although illegal aliens are vetted during initial processing, that vetting pales in comparison to the in-depth vetting conducted during the legal immigration process. Additionally, vetting at the border is limited to the criminal and watch list databases available to U.S. federal law enforcement. While those databases are extensive, they are not all-inclusive. Because the U.S. does not have access to criminal and terrorist watch list databases from nations such as China, Senegal, and Pakistan, we are not able to conclusively determine during the vetting process the potential terrorist threat illegal aliens from countries such as these present to the American people. This fiscal year alone, 52,000 illegal aliens have entered the United States from China, Senegal, and Pakistan. Of more concern is the upward of 2 million gotaways and the unknown number of undetected aliens that have entered the United States since 2021. With the skyrocketing number of known terrorists apprehended at the border, it is reasonable to assume the number of bad actors entering the United States undetected has also skyrocketed. The open flow of illegal aliens across all our nation's borders has significant and potentially devastating second and third order effects. We have the laws in place to secure our borders. They must be enforced. We have dedicated men and women working across all levels of law enforcement committed to securing our borders. They must be fully resourced. What we do not have are policies which enable law enforcement personnel to do their job, enforce our nation's laws, and secure our nation's borders. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Healy for his opening statement of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. On January 17th, Kevin Brock, a retired assistant director, former head of the FBI Intelligence Division, convened a group of former senior FBI executives to draft a letter to Congress expressing our deep concern about the current threat that poses unprecedented danger to the U.S. This group of FBI leaders was notably diverse. Their professional backgrounds encompassed a wider range of expertise within the FBI. The threat we faced was equally varied, spanning the full spectrum of the FBI investigations. The threat was new and unfamiliar. Our concern was that military-aged men from across the globe, many in countries and regions hostile to the U.S., were arriving on our soils by the thousands. Not by disembarking from a ship or parachuting from a plane, but by crossing the border on foot, a border widely recognized around the world as largely unprotected and easily accessible. This group included individuals apprehended by the border officials potentially released into the country, along with an alarming number of gotaways, which everyone has spoken about. Gotaways from fiscal year 2021 to 2024 totaled over 2 million. Considering such a daunting and unprecedented level of penetration of our borders, it's reasonable to assess that the country's national security has been dramatically diminished. On 2021, the demographics of those crossing the border began to shift. The number of young men traveling alone around the world drastically increased. Alarmingly, a significant number of them were found on the terrorist watch list or for countries from state-sponsored terrorism. From 2021 to 2023, over 7,924,000 encounters nationwide. Since July of 2024, more than 2,427,000, bringing the total to 10,351,000. These unprecedented numbers have shattered all expectations, pushing our country's screening capabilities to the breaking point and exposing vulnerabilities at a scale once never imagined. Given the sheer volume, it seems likely that effectively screening terrorists against the terrorist watch list has become an incredible challenge, creating serious concerns for our national security. As a former director of the TSC, my foremost concern was encounters within the U.S. In my experience, numbers mattered. 19 al-Qaeda terrorists on 4 commercial jets fundamentally altered our world. In that landscape, a single terrorist act has the potential to impact millions of lives. I witnessed it firsthand, the potential of devastating, even of a lone terrorist that could cause. Consider the events of Christmas Day on 2009 when the underwear bomber attempted to detonate explosions on Northwest Flight 253, or on May 1st, 2010, when Faisal Shahzad tried to ignite a bomb in Times Square. Both events, driven by actions of just 2 individuals, had the potential to cause catastrophic consequences for thousands. Numbers matter. Whether it's 19 or just 1, the potential consequences can be devastating. Between 2017 and 2020, 14 individuals on the terrorist watch list were apprehended by Border Patrol between points of entry. This is alarming as the apprehensions at these locations indicate that a suspected terrorist is actively trying to avoid detection. However, the situation has grown more urgent. From 2021 to 2024, 380 individuals on the watch list were apprehended between points of entry, an increase of 2,614%. The numbers underscore the escalating scale of the threat. To add to this, between 2021 and 2024, borders officials on the southwest border encountered individuals on the terrorist watch list from 36 different countries. The reality is compounded by the 2 million gotaways who evaded capture. It would be crazy to assume that none of these individuals were on the watch list. In fact, it's highly likely that watch-listed individuals would have a stronger motivation to avoid detection, making it impossible to know how many actually crossed undetected. These facts paint a stark picture of the unprecedented challenge we face. The numbers do just matter. They tell us how precarious our current situation really is. In 2024, Director Wray testified that he was particularly concerned about the scores of potential terrorists who had entered the country because they weren't on the watch list initially, but the DHS had released them. He explained that in many cases, the FBI didn't have enough information to put them on the watch list. It was only after receiving new intelligence from overseas that they identified these individuals that should have been watch listed. Director Wray is right to be concerned. The new and unprecedented threat demands immediate and decisive action. Our borders must be secure, and those already in the country illegally must be identified, vetted, and if necessary, watch listed. We must act swiftly and comprehensively to close the gap that adversaries may seek to exploit. The stakes couldn't be higher. The need for vigilance, dedication, and immediate action is never more critical. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Nowrasteh for his opening statement of 5 minutes.
Chairman Pfluger and Higgins, ranking members Magazina and Correa, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Over the decades, Cato Institute scholars have produced original research on immigration and realistic evaluations of the threat of foreign-born terrorism. To analyze the security consequences of illegal immigration, we must focus on the facts and analyze them rationally. We must start such an analysis with the base rate of foreign-born terrorism to correctly understand the terrorist threat posed by illegal immigrants. The base rate, also known as prior probability, is the likelihood of a terrorist attack before considering any new information, like the increase in illegal immigration over the last several years. The first potential base rate is that terrorists who entered as illegal immigrants have committed 0 attacks on U.S. soil and, as a result, have murdered or injured 0 people in terrorist attacks in the United States. The 9 terrorists who have entered the United States illegally could also be included here. They were all arrested before carrying out their attacks. 5 of them illegally crossed the U.S.-Canada border, 1 was a stowaway on a ship, and 3 of them, the Duca brothers, entered illegally through the U.S.-Mexico border in 1984 when they were young children. In 2007, they were convicted as part of the Fort Dix plot. The second potential base rate is that all foreign-born terrorists, not just those who entered illegally, have murdered 3,046 people in attacks on U.S. soil since 1975, equivalent to about 0.3% of all homicides during that time. That includes, of course, the 9/11 attacks, the deadliest terror attacks in world history that account for almost 98% of all people murdered by foreign-born terrorists on U.S. soil. The annual chance of being murdered in an attack committed by foreign-born terrorists is about 1 in 4.5 million per year during that time. The third potential base rate is the 44 people murdered in foreign-born terrorist attacks on U.S. soil since 9/11, an average of about 2 victims per year, accounting for 0.01% of all homicides since 9/11, and translating to a 1 in 157 million chance per year of being killed. So we can reasonably choose any of these 3 base rates. 1, 0 people killed by illegal immigrant terrorists. 2, the 3,046 people killed by all foreign-born terrorists since 1975. Or 3, the 44 people killed by foreign-born terrorists since 9/11. Now, regardless of the base rate that you choose for this, foreign-born terrorism on U.S. soil is a small and manageable threat that is even smaller when focusing on terrorists who could cross the U.S.-Mexico border. How low is the risk? So low that some analysts even resort to making up terrorism cases where there are none. They exaggerate unknowns, rely on incomplete investigations, or hyperbolize news stories like in Quantico, Virginia. Those exaggerators have inverted the anti-terror slogan, see something, say something, into the postmodern, say something, see something. They think that calling something terrorism makes it so, but it does not. Some people would argue that the base rate should be higher because the number of migrants encountered entering between ports of entry who are on the terrorism watch list is much higher than in recent years. The facts are that of all Border Patrol encounters along the US-Mexico border, only, and there's a lot of zeros here, so bear with me, 0.001% were on the watch list in the 2017 to 2020 period, compared to 0.005% since then. Furthermore, few migrants on the watch list are actually terrorists, which is evidenced by the 0 terrorism-related charges brought against them. Illegal immigrants who crossed the US-Mexico border had never murdered or injured anyone in a terrorist attack on US soil, but it could happen. I want to emphasize that. It could happen. The chance is above 0. The government should continue to screen migrants, travelers, and immigrants to the United States to exclude security threat. In conclusion, a focus on the facts shows us that the threat of illegal immigration, terrorism, is small and manageable. Thank you.
I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and members for their upcoming questions. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask that witnesses respond in writing pursuant to Committee Rule 7D. The hearing record will be open for 10 days. Without objection, we will get into the questions. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. I'll start with Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown, it sounds like there is 0.000% chance of a terror attack happening, even though we have 382 people who have entered. So when talking about base rates, I think it's also important to talk about the fact that we had 11 people that matched the terror watch list between 2017 and 2020, and now we have 382. From your time working as a military advisor in DHS to now, what has changed in this period of time to cause the massive increase? And that's just the ones that we know about.
Mr. Congressman, in my opinion, it is the change of policy that has emboldened the terrorists to come to our borders more so than they ever have before. While I was serving in the administration, there was this consolidated effort, not only with action on the ground, but most importantly with policies at the federal level to ensure that we took great steps to close our border and discourage folks from entering illegally. This has nothing to do with legal immigration. It's all about the illegal entry. And there was a clear message sent that that was not going to be tolerated. Since the administration change, there has been a clear message sent to include day one of the current administration that those policies were no longer going to be enforced and that it was a much more open society. I know that in my very first town hall with the now Secretary of Homeland Security, I asked the question, what has changed since the election in November to January of 2021? Because the numbers on our border had increased so dramatically. And the response was, well, there are situations in their home countries. So then I asked again more specifically, what specifically has changed? Because from my analysis, there's nothing has changed so dramatically over the last 4 months in any of the nations of which we had our illegal aliens entering, other than the change of administration here in the United States. My question was removed from the chat, even though I put it in twice, and it was refused to be answered. So in my opinion, it's the pull factors and the attitude of the administration.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Mr. Healy, I'll go to you. One of the issues that we found on our congressional travel to North Africa and the Middle East was the use of private air charters as a way for terror cells and organized criminal organizations to bring people to either South America or Central America that have now made their way into the United States. Can you talk about your experiences investigating this and shed some light on what is happening and how they're getting into through the southwest border into this country?
I have to agree with Dr. Brown. I'm a numbers person, and I'm concerned about numbers. I'm concerned about one terrorist threat and one terrorist. And I worked as an undercover FBI agent and spent several months with a domestic terrorist group, the Montana Freemen, and lived with them for several months. What you're dealing with, whether you're talking about percentages and numbers, is that there's a difference with a terrorist threat and terrorist action. I investigated hundreds of bank robberies and no one cared. But when one terrorist like Faisal Shahzad tries to blow up a bomb at Times Square, everything changes. So it's not a question of, for me, it's always been a question of numbers. And the issue is that, you know, everything seemed to be working 4 or 5 years ago, and they shut the border down. And I talked to friends at the Terror Screening Center. They said the numbers were workable, and we could screen it. The whole process with the Terror Screening Center and with Congress and with the Border Patrol is we have to have the opportunity and the time to sit down and talk to these individuals and identify who they are and how they work against the U.S.
Let me ask another question. Are you worried about a terrorist attack in this country because of the open border policies and 382 plus people that match the terror watch list?
When I was the director of the Terror Screening Center, I was concerned about encounters of people that we didn't know were in the U.S. And I identified specifically encounters with law enforcement officers and if we had open cases on them. Typically, we'd have 1 per month. That 1 per month that we had for 12, I lost sleep over until an FBI agent initiated a case to work it so that somebody was watching this individual and making sure that he was not going to do a terrorist act. So yes, when the numbers go from 14 to 380, that's not manageable. When the numbers go from 2 million gotaways, and the gotaways primarily are looking for, I don't want to be seen, yes. So I am concerned at the state of the U.S. right now.
Thank you. My time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you again to our witnesses for your fine testimony. And Mr. Healy, you're a numbers man. So I want to put up right now this anti-defamation heat map, if I can, of domestic terrorism attacks in the U.S. Does this concern you?
Yes, absolutely.
And you said you were part of that Montana operation. So we should also be focusing on domestic terrorism as well. And
Absolutely.
Given the attacks in the United States from domestic terrorists, this should be one of our priorities. But this committee has not had any hearings on domestic terrorism. An American life is an American life, lost, irrespective of it's a foreign or domestic terrorist. But the probability, based on the numbers, is here, okay? What just happened in Ohio is here from individuals from the U.S. motivating the kind of behavior. Sir, I'm gonna ask you, can you put into context the threat Americans face from migrants? I mean, compare and contrast. Where should we invest our resources when it comes to protecting Americans from terrorist attacks?
So to be very clear, the threat from terrorism overall is a relatively small component of the total threat to the life, liberty, and property of Americans. However, since 9/11, it's important to point out that through the year 2017, which is my most recent numbers on this, 41 people have been murdered by attacks committed by foreign-born terrorists through 2017 from after 9/11, and 149 people murdered by native-born American terrorists.
And let me
so the
say
threat is
that-
much higher from
And if I can interrupt you, I don't have much time, but I want to be clear. We're not minimizing the threat of foreign attacks on our soil. All of us remember 9/11. I just want to make sure we have a 360-degree view of what the challenges are for us Americans in this country. That's what we're paid to do, to make sure we protect American lives. We mentioned 382 on the terrorist watch list that have been, I guess, arrested or identified. How many of those are from the Colombia Civil War, the FARC list? And I say that to you because I've gone to the Homeland Security Targeting Center, and there's a lot of folks that are arrested at the borders, they should be, that are on this watch list, but the president of Colombia today would be classified as a terrorist because he was part of that revolution 40 years ago. It's okay, but I think we need to focus our resources on the real threats, and they are emerging on a daily basis. Just a couple of hours ago, Mr. Chairman, I was at a Aspen Institute meeting with General James Jones, former National Security Advisor, 40-year Marine. And you know what he said, the big issue right now in the world that's motivating people to move? Ms. Brown, you talk about the pull. I think he was talking about the push. He talked about food insecurity. He said the world is not doing well post-COVID. There is hunger. There are children starving around the world, and we are not doing well. And he said that as in context of a national security advisor saying, this is the root cause of a lot of this migration. There's a lot of other reasons, but the point is we as a nation have to focus to make sure people are not motivated to come to this country because of hunger. If I look at everybody in this room here today, I bet you that was one of the motivating factors for our ancestors to come to America. You're starving in Ireland, you didn't have enough food, potato famine, or God knows what else you're running away from in your home. We need to focus on that, and we don't do enough of a job to do that. We will continue to build a wall in the southern border that started with Democratic President Clinton, God knows how many years ago, 20 years ago, and we'll probably start doing the same thing in the northern border. You talk to the Canadians, and they're pissed off of all the stuff that's going north, from fentanyl, guns. So hopefully we can sit down and rationally think through this, okay? What we have right now are refugees at the border. What we have working, feeding our community in this country are farm workers that have been here in this country 20, 30 years that don't have a way to get a green card. And the challenge that we have, which is being number one here, is terrorism. 3 buckets that are always mixed into one. And if we don't figure out the facts, we're not going to be accurately taking care of these challenges. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the witnesses for being here, and I'm going to attempt to drill down into the so-called gotaways, called runners on the border, gotaways. And I'm going to ask each of you to clarify. Dr. Brown, you had stated in your opening statement that of more concern is the upwards of 2 million gotaways, an unknown number of undetected aliens that have entered the United States since 2021. Is that part of your opening statement, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you stand by that number, upwards of 2 million?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Mr. Healy, you stated in your opening statement, gotaways for fiscal years 2021 through 2024, year-to-date, total over 2 million. Former Chief of Border Patrol testified this figure was underreported by at least 20%, so you concluded closer to 2.5 million.
2.4 million.
Okay, I appreciate you being specific, but there seems to be concurrence between 2 experts that there's well over 2 million gotaways have come into our country across the southern border.
Yes, if you
Think
take
that's a reasonable assessment?
yes.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Nowrasteh, do you concur? That's probably a reasonable assessment.
It is a reasonable assessment.
Okay, thank you very much. So, you're a fascinating gentleman, Dr. Nowrasteh, Mr. Nowrasteh. I'm gonna just ask you, you feel like it's all cool at the border?
Absolutely not. It's a chaotic and out of control
Okay,
situation.
that was my question. I appreciate you clarifying it's chaotic and out of control. So clearly you don't support open border policies.
An open border with no checks on it? No, I don't.
Do you support a border that's controlled by cartels?
No, I do not.
Okay. Well, you recognize that the criminal cartels control 100% of the Mexican side of our southern border, correct?
They have a lot of control down there.
They
and
certainly do. So let's talk about the gotaways, because America's fascinated by your perspective here. We see and feel the impact. I mean, America has suffered generational trauma since January 2021, 100% because of policy changes, not because you still have the same 1,954 miles of border. You have the same vehicles and equipment, capabilities and assets, the same all-weather roads installed, the same physical barriers, the same Border Patrol agents, the same men and women working the same border, and you had a drastic change in illegal crossings early in 2021. And one of the most concerning demographics amongst that wave upon human wave of illegal immigrants coming into our country, to me, because of my background, is the people that would run from the law. So given the fact that our Border Patrol law enforcement agents were transitioned from their national security role, their law enforcement role, repelling illegal entry and capturing those that crossed illegally as much as possible. They transitioned to sort of reception roles and caring for and transporting, feeding, etc. The gotaways, that demographic that would be highly motivated to avoid American law enforcement, we're talking about they're paying more money to cartels to suffer the dangerous, double-time pace, very rough terrain land nav, to avoid law enforcement. Doesn't it stand to reason, Mr. Nowrasteh, that those would likely be the most dangerous people of the totality coming into our country?
It's certainly possible. We don't have a good sense of that, but given
What else
the
would
low-
drive someone to do that? If you can turn yourself in and comfortably be processed into the country, given money, food, medical check, et cetera, transport to wherever you want to go, why would you pay thousands of dollars more and go through very dangerous, sometimes deadly transit into the country in order to avoid law enforcement? Clearly, it's because you're a bad guy.
It's because a lot of them won't also be let in through that means. They want to come to the United States to work. The best predictor of illegal immigration is the U.S. labor market.
Reclaiming my time. Dr. Brown, in my last question, ma'am, just tell America a little bit, what was it like in the spring of 2021 as you saw things begin to unravel?
Let's limit this to about 20 seconds.
It was demoralizing, heartbreaking, and unnecessary.
Thank you for that summary, Doctor. We appreciate you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Ramirez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the witnesses that are here today. I also want to recognize that just last week, we recognized the anniversary of the heinous 9/11 terrorist attacks that took the lives of 2,977 people. Future stolen for 2,977 individuals. And actually, Congress created this committee, Homeland Security, to ensure that we'd protect the American people from terrorist attacks. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues choose to use our committee time to spew false narratives, conspiracy theories, and racist tropes that point as immigrants as terrorists. Immigrants, like my mother and my husband, as terrorists, just to score cheap political points. So look, we should be using this committee to actually discuss how we strengthen the federal government's ability to prevent and respond to terrorist threats by digging into the data and digging into the evidence. So for the next few minutes, I actually want to do just that. I want to ensure that data in this committee is used accurately and portrayed accurately, and I want to talk about Donald Trump's favorite chart here, which we used yesterday. In this chart, titled Illegal Immigration into the U.S., Biden's world record illegal immigrants, many from prisons and mental institutions, also terrorists, Donald Trump has said this chart saved his life. And yesterday, in our full committee hearing, Republicans, my colleagues here, repeatedly used this chart to allege that the Biden administration has an open border policy. But this life-saving chart says, well, not what Republicans think it says. First of all, I don't know where the Trumpsters and Republicans of the world who like to trot out this chart get the idea that immigration into the United States is a, quote, world record, unquote, because recorded history is full of mass migration due to wars, due to famine, to disease, and opportunity in numbers so high, folks, it wouldn't even fit in this chart. So it's not a world record. Secondly, and it's almost embarrassing that I have to educate and explain to members of Congress and a former president, but when someone says that they're seeking asylum, and they're coming to the United States seeking asylum, that doesn't mean that they're literally coming from a mental institution. Third, as my friend, Congressman Garcia, pointed out yesterday, Republicans and former President Trump, they don't even know when Trump left office. This chart says that he left April 2020. Trump actually left office in January of 2021 when the numbers were rising and higher, actually even higher than during Obama's second term. Fourth, let's just keep going on this chart. The chart itself shows that when Trump came into office, the numbers actually began rising. The dip in numbers where Trump claims he left office is actually April 2020, at the height of the early COVID-19 pandemic, when folks, migration numbers were dropped globally. I know it's hard for you to see because you've been reading this and now you're finally realizing, oh my God, I've been saying lies. Trump was in office for another 9 months, and those numbers actually were climbing. And lastly, this month, the month that they're talking about, is not even the lowest during Trump's time in office or even in recorded history. Folks, facts matter. We have to stop with the disinformation. But I guess when it comes to making charts for the former president, that doesn't apply. And I'm going to tell you, this committee is a serious committee. We have to use facts. So I want to use the last minute here. I want to come back to Mr. Nowrasteh. Can you help us understand, because actually I think some of my colleagues don't understand, why are people coming to the United States and risking their lives the way that they are? And how does that help us economically?
The primary reason why immigrants come to the U.S. historically and today, legally and illegally, is because of job and labor market opportunities. If you want to do a regression analysis, you can see very closely that the job openings in the U.S. is closely correlated with the number of illegal immigrant apprehensions along the border and with people trying to come here legally. The best pull to come to the U.S. has always been the economy. It is still the economy. That is what's pulling people in. And the rapid economic recovery after COVID can explain more than any other factor, although some of the other ones do matter, can explain more than any other change in policy why there is such a rapid and large increase in illegal immigration.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas who represents the longest stretch of border on the southwest border, and my neighbor, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman. I love charts and PowerPoints just as much as the next person. A lot of people talk about the border. I happen to represent 823 miles of it. And you cannot dispute that there's been hundreds of people coming over on the terrorist watch list. And anyone on the terrorist watch list is on that list for a reason and poses a threat. I don't even want to talk about those people. I want to talk about the people not on the terrorist watch list that terrorize us. I represent a district that stretches from San Antonio to El Paso, Eagle Pass, Del Rio, Uvalde, El Paso, is all in my district. And one of my concerns that I have is the rise in Venezuelan gangs, Tren de Agua, TDA. This is a real threat, right? A lot of times they don't make a list, and they're terrorizing people more than everyone else. My first question is to you, Mr. Healy. Given your experience in the FBI during MS-13's reign on terror in the early 2000s, do you believe TDA poses a threat on a similar scale or greater scale?
The same. What I didn't include is that not only terrorists are coming across the country, but criminals. And the problem is that this, and it wasn't in my oral testimony, but it was in my written testimony, that this involved, this invasion that we're having right now has involved every single FBI field office. It has involved the vast majority of their squads, criminal squads, counterterrorism squads, counterintelligence squads, intelligence squads, the rest of it. So this is a serious problem and a concern.
So in my district, we see it firsthand. I mean, I visited a facility out in Pecos, out in West Texas, where these criminal aliens get housed, right? Ones that have committed heinous crimes. You try walking through a prison, that's not a fun experience. Try walking through a prison with some of the worst illegal aliens are there waiting to be either their time incarcerated or be deported. I would argue that TDA makes MS-13 look like Boy Scouts. And the reason I say that is because each criminal organization that comes always tries to one-up the one before it. They're more ruthless, they do more murders, they do more rapes, they do more human smuggling, they do more drugs, more guns. They're more ruthless than the person before, is why you should fear them, is why they should grow. I see them growing in tentacles in places well beyond the border, larger cities, not only in Texas, but throughout the country. And this is the danger. We're barely now just talking about TDA as if they're similar to MS-13. They're worse, and they're gonna get a whole lot worse. My second question to you for Mr. Healy is, what strategies can we implement to better equip law enforcement to address this threat?
And centering it toward the border, we've got to go back to what we did to keep them out. We have to start there. I understand the fact that there is challenges all over the world. I understand the fact that there's domestic terrorism around. But the bottom line is that this threat didn't have to happen. This threat could have been fixed. It could have been adjusted. The drastic differences between 2021 and now is unmanageable.
One of the biggest challenges I see with TDA in particular is they don't have specific tattoos to represent membership. They have a variety of different identifiers. Venezuela does not share its criminal records with Interpol, so oftentimes that makes it challenging in identifying them in the first place. So a lot of times the information that we're getting now is a TDA member that has already committed a crime in the United States. That is a disjustice to all the Americans that are here, that are being terrorized by these folks that should have been caught on the front end. The other part is, I look at it through the lens of how do you solve the problem? This isn't a federal problem. We know why it was created. I don't even want to argue how we got here. I don't want to see any more charts. All I care about is, how does this go away? How do we fix this? And I think one of the ways we fix this is we come together, federal, state, and local law enforcement, all pull their resources and go after these people. Go after these Venezuelan gangs that are terrorizing us. They may not be on a terrorist watch list. They may not, they may not be on a counter that we have. When I spoke with the director of ICE, he told me there are over 10,000 known criminal aliens loose in the United States right now. That's, in my eyes, where we need to start, and then we go from there. With that, I'm out of time, Chairman, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from California, Mr. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. Counterterrorism, of course, is critical to the Department of Homeland Security. It's important, I know, to everybody that's here. And we know that border security is an important part of that tool. Our security professionals are hard at work, which we have seen, of course, in recent arrests, and our committee should also support that work. I also know that we shouldn't distort national security threats to score political points. Hopefully no one is interested in that. But there's so many other types of extremism and other types of major security threats which should be focused on, whether it's mass shootings, domestic extremism, which should be looked at by this committee. We often, over and over again, including in this committee, continue to demonize immigrants, continue to somehow put all of our criminal issues on the backs of immigrants, folks like my family, folks like myself. And we should be very clear about actually what's happening in this country and actually looking at the data as it relates to immigrants and crime. And if we're being honest with each other, we can see that immigrants are contributing to this country and not causing these kinds of exaggerations that my colleagues here on this committee are saying. I want to start with an important data point over here, if I can just share this really quick. So, Mr. Nowrasteh, here we have a chart of the annual homicide rate going back for the last few decades. You can see it's pretty clear. This is all the way from the 1960s all the way till today. Now, looking at this, and this is data collected by police departments and the FBI and others, do you agree that the country is safer today as it relates to homicides than in the 70s, 80s, and 90s?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to point out the immigrant population is substantially higher today, too.
Thank you. And I want to point out that if you look at this, clearly, we are safer today than we have ever been over the last few decades. I do want to point out, though, in the year 2020, we do see a dramatic spike. Do you see the spike there over here, right around the year 2020?
Yes.
Great. And who was actually the president in 2020?
Donald Trump was the president of the United States in 2020.
So the largest spike that we see in actual homicides over the last few decades is a year that Donald Trump was actually the president of the United States. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is it true that under Donald Trump, murder rates surged by 30% to the highest rate since the late 90s?
There was a very large surge in the last year of his administration.
Right, so here we have crime rates are going down, homicide rates are up here in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They start to decrease, and then we see the one spike when Donald Trump was president. Then, of course, as we go into 2021, who then got elected president then?
Joe Biden was elected.
And since that time, if you look at this chart, is violent crime starting then to decrease or increase once Joe Biden became the president?
It started to decrease from the elevated level that it was.
Thank you. So it's important to note here that now crime is beginning to decrease. Now, the Major City Chiefs Association, which represents the 60 major city police departments in America, including Long Beach, where I was mayor, honored to have served and to help lead. We had over 700 police officers, which an incredible group of men and women. Through this period of time in 2024 and 2023, we have actually seen a drop in murders and killings, not just back home in California, but across the country. So as we can see in this chart, homicides have plummeted, and we know they continue to plummet. I think it's important that we take the word of our police officers and their data, what they're presenting, over what Donald Trump is saying. And I want to show you one other chart, which also is important. Now, again, sir, is it true that the incarceration rate for both documented and even undocumented immigrants is far below the rate for native-born citizen Americans?
Yes, it is.
So today, immigrants are 60% less likely to be incarcerated than all other U.S.-born individuals. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, I only say this because, as you can see, native-born Americans are actually committing crimes and then going to jail at a higher rate than the immigrant population. And I say that not because we should want folks in jail. Everyone should be accountable to the law. But this idea that immigrants are somehow doing or causing more crime or filling up our prisons more or committing and creating more chaos across this country is actually not true when you look at the data. And so I think it's very important that we call out the lies and the untruths that are happening from folks that are running for president, and quite frankly, also from folks that are on this committee. We know that undocumented people that are here, that are legal immigrants, are actually committing less crime when you look at the total number. And so I wanted to make those points and make sure that we're talking about facts. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Ms. Green, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. This is such an important hearing today, talking about terrorism. The definition of terror is a feeling of extreme fear. And it's a very sad day that we live in, that many Americans are living with a feeling of extreme fear. Currently, as it stands right now, the Biden administration does not make known the number of special interest aliens on the Department of Homeland Security website. This is a very concerning figure and statistic that they are hiding from the American people. There have been at least 73,000 special interest aliens arrested at our border. That's a number we know because it was leaked to the media. The number is likely far higher now, but we don't know that information because it does not exist and it is not provided to the American people who, by the way, fund the Department of Homeland Security through their taxes. Special interest aliens are from a nation that promotes terrorist activity, harbors terrorists, or poses a security threat to the United States. This does not include the potential special interest aliens among the over 2 million known gotaways. So while we've caught at least 73,000 or more at the border, there are another over 2 million we have no idea who they are, where they are, and what they're planning to do in our country. This comes along with the statistic that we've been provided that there have been 388 illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list caught crossing between ports of entry since fiscal year 2021. This compares to only 14 that were caught between fiscal year 2017 and 2020 under the Trump administration. I have a very important bill that if passed and signed into law, this bill would make the number of special interest aliens and countries of origin publicly available on the Department of Homeland Security website for the American people. Dr. Brown, do you agree that the American people deserve to know that number?
Yes.
Mr. Healy, do you agree they deserve to know?
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Nowrasteh, do you agree that the American people deserve to know how many special interest aliens are crossing into our country?
The American people deserve to know that and any other number you can get out of them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would also like to take just a few minutes to talk about terror and the extreme feeling of fear. That's extreme fear. The American people are living with fear from the amount of people that have come across our border, and they have good reason to do so. There are approximately an average of 300 Americans that are killed every single day from fentanyl poisoning. That's certainly something to fear. There are Americans that die daily from illegal alien crime and murder. Just in the past 2 weeks, there was a mother of 3 children and a passenger in her car were killed in a car wreck from an illegal alien that struck them at over 100 miles per hour. These are also credible reasons to fear the illegal alien immigration coming across our border. However, I was quite concerned, Mr. Nowrasteh, to hear you talk about over 3,000 Americans that have been murdered in the past decades, and you called that a small and manageable statistic. I would argue that every single one of those lives should never have been killed. And I know that you call yourself, self-described, radical advocate for open borders. That's on your Wikipedia page, but maybe Wikipedia is not always right.
I didn't say it.
However, I would self-describe myself as a radical advocate for safe and secure borders. And I think it's extremely important to make sure that all of us are on the same page for that, because not one life that has been murdered by a terrorist could be considered small and manageable. I'd also like to talk for just a minute, if you will, and ask you, will you consider when you're talking about jobs, and we agree jobs are important, the economy's important. Now, the cartels are making over $13 billion a year with their jobs coming into our country, selling drugs, making money off of human trafficking. Would you argue that those jobs are important in our economy, cartel jobs?
No, and I think the federal government should stop subsidizing them and they should stop subsidizing them by radically expanding legal immigration so you can kill those cartels in the same way that Congress killed the mafia when it ended prohibition.
So you're advocating for wide open borders so that cartels can come in and sell drugs into our country. I have you know in
advocating for
Georgia,
legalizing immigration.
Mr. Nowrasteh, legalized immigration. Mr. Nowrasteh, you are wanting to open the borders and legalize cartels selling drugs. In Georgia, we have a serious issue of cartels putting drugs inside our food supply. And therefore, when things like lettuce and watermelons come across the U.S.-Mexican border and make their way to the farmers market in Georgia, they are finding gigantic shipments of methamphetamines, cocaine, actually stuffed in shipments of things like watermelon, lettuce, and celery. This is extremely dangerous for people, restaurant owners, people that consume this. This is extremely dangerous. And so you're wanting to open and legalize these jobs in the United States?
No, those are consequences of black markets.
All right, sir, I'm sorry, Ms. Green's
Yeah,
time's
thank you,
expired.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Goldman, sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Well, I finally found something I agree with my colleague from Georgia. She is certainly radical. I want to focus on the subject of terrorism that is of this hearing. For this fiscal year to date, CBP reports encountering 96 watch-listed individuals between the southern border ports of entry. Let's put that in perspective. That is 0.007% of all Border Patrol encounters in fiscal year 2024. And we know that being on the watch list is not equivalent to being a known terrorist. There are many ways you get on that watch list, and it is certainly not determinative. But there is no question that there is a problem at the border. Our system cannot withstand the number of people who are trying to get into this country. And I would completely agree with you, Mr. Nowrasteh. Part of that is because the quotas for lawful visas have not been increased in 25 to 30 years, even though, of course, our population has dramatically increased, our economy has dramatically grown. We need people to fill jobs in this country up and down the spectrum. I want to also just focus on a couple of things. Mr. Healy, I'll ask you, do you think that it would be helpful to address our problems at the border if the Department of Justice received $440 million to hire additional immigration judge teams?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if CBP received $3.8 billion to fund operational costs to manage and enhance security at our nation's borders?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if CBP received $723 million to hire additional officers and Border Patrol agents?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if DHS received $424 million to combat the entry of fentanyl and other illegal narcotics from entering the United States?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if the Immigration and Customs Enforcement received $2.55 billion to fund transportation costs, including increased flights and staging facilities?
Yes.
Do you think it would be helpful if ICE received $1.29 billion to fund an expansion of the Alternatives to Detention program, which would allow for immediate enrollment at the southwest border to fulfill non-mandatory detention mandates while keeping track of those who come in?
I'm not sure of that directive.
What about $4 billion for U.S. citizen and immigration services for personnel, facilities, and related costs to meet new operational requirements, including adding 4,338 asylum officers?
I'm not familiar with that either.
Well, you are aware, of course, that asylum applications take up to 10 years to to get through. Is that right?
Yes.
So you don't think that adding more than 4,000 asylum officers would help streamline that process and stop the incentive for people to try to get asylum here?
I'm with CBP, I understand the support they have, but the reality is that if we close the borders, we have, even President Biden issued an executive order that stopped the flow.
So all those things I just asked you about were in the bipartisan border security bill that the Senate had agreed to in a bipartisan way, the administration had supported. And do you know who killed that bill?
No, I don't, but the frustration for the
Okay, I'll tell you who killed that bill. Donald Trump killed that bill. And he was open about it. And he said he killed it because he didn't want to solve the problems at the border, that all of those things you just agreed would help do so, because he wanted to use it as a political weapon in his campaign. So when we are talking about immigration reform, we can all agree that it can not only be done by executive order. President Biden had no choice but to implement an executive order that forced people to come through ports of entry if they sought asylum, which has dramatically lowered by more than 50% the border crossings and encounters since he implemented it in June. But that is not a solution. The solution is legislation. And there was legislation that the Republicans killed. So please do not lecture me about all of our problems at the border when it is the Republican Party and Donald Trump who are the ones who refuse to solve the problem. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Nowrasteh, sorry, forgive me, I apologize, sir.
Nowrasteh.
Nowrasteh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, it's very
Not that I
poorly
couldn't pronounce it,
spelled.
I almost really can't see that far anymore. So, the Boston Marathon bombing, the bombing of the Twin Towers in the 1990s, 93 February, if I'm correct. 9/11. I consider those terrorist attacks through terrorist organizations. And I've heard some statistics from my colleagues that that's not considered a foreign-born terrorist attack because they were documented or registered in the United States. Can you clarify that for me?
So in the data that I have and have presented in my testimony, those were all conducted by foreign-born terrorists, so they would count under that umbrella of terrorism committed by foreigners.
That have been committed in the United States?
Yes.
Okay.
And I have a list of 230 foreign-born terrorists who have either committed or attempted to commit and were convicted.
Because I need clarification on that, because the challenging part for myself, I'm just going to speak for Morgan here, is that I can't go home to my folks when we're talking about, so I'm very laser focused on the terrorist watch list and those folks that are coming across that meet that category, okay? Because I can't say they were foreign-born terrorists, but they were legalized in America, so we can't count that.
So they're definitely foreign-born if they were born outside of the United States. Even if somebody is a legal immigrant and a terrorist and becomes an American citizen, I count them as foreign-born, just like the U.S. government does.
Okay, when I speak about the terrorist watch list and those individuals that are listed on it, have you ever been in Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa? Have you ever been to a theater of war?
No.
Have you ever experienced anything catastrophic? Have you ever been engaged in a gunfight? That may be a silly question, but I need to know these answers.
I have had a gun pointed at me, but I have not been involved in a
It's an amazing
gunfight.
experience, isn't it?
That's a nice euphemism for it.
Yes, it is. I'm trying to be genuine in here, and I'm trying to be simple in here, I guess the best way to say that. So, have you ever read the book or seen the documentary Terror of Beslan, the school siege in Russia?
I've not seen the documentary, but I've seen footage of that attack.
Okay, so that's the terrorist organization came in and took over a school. A certain number, and it was a massacre, right? And when I see this list, the terror list is what I'm talking about here. My concern is it only takes one. It only takes one terrorist to perform an extreme act of violence. Man, me and that man right there, Mr. Crane, have been in multiple gunfights, multiple VBIED explosions, multiple suicide bombs overseas in the theater of war. And a lot of times, it was one person, one. And if we can do anything and everything we can to prevent, capture, kill any terrorist that's coming into this country, that's what needs to happen. I walked shoulder to shoulder with Mr. Goldman in New York City 2 weeks ago on 9/11. 9/11. The museum is beyond humbling. I don't want anything like that to ever happen again in this country. And it seems like and I hate to say this, but we're getting caught in the political jargon right now. That should not happen when we're trying to protect American citizens. Period. So I'm glad you clarified the fact that we have had attacks on our country from foreign-born entities. And moving forward, paying close attention and getting away from the jargon that we don't need makes it easier on us. And the numbers that you rattled off, I understand, you're a statistician. They're great. But even if we're talking about 0.07%, that's still one person. Is that clear?
Yes, sir, it is. I'm not saying do nothing. All I'm saying is don't do everything. We have to consider, you have lots of different security threats. You have to allocate scarce resources to save the greatest number of lives.
If we don't do everything, that one thing we don't do is going to get us killed.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it is impossible to do everything. Do you want to spend 100% of U.S. GDP on counterterrorism?
Okay. I don't know if you know my background or not, or that man sitting over there, but our job was to do everything, period. And that's why we were 99.9% successful. Thank you for your time, sir. Mr. Magaziner, sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Listen, I agree we should do everything we can to secure the border and protect the American people. Everything should have included passing the bipartisan border plan that Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats, and the Harris-Biden administration agreed to, that Donald Trump and his Republican allies killed. Mr. Nowrasteh, are you familiar with the bipartisan border plan that Donald Trump and the Republicans killed?
Yes, I am.
Is it accurate that that bipartisan border plan that President Trump killed would have added about 1,500 Border Patrol agents?
Yes, as I understand it.
Is it accurate that it would have expanded the authorities of the president to secure the border, including by changing asylum policies, et cetera?
Yes, it would have.
Is it true that it would have added over 100 high-tech machines at points of entry along the border to detect fentanyl coming into the country?
Yes, it would have.
Is it true that the bipartisan plan that President Trump killed to secure the border had the endorsement of the Border Patrol Union?
As I understand it, yes.
Now, the lead Republican negotiator of the bipartisan border security plan that President Trump killed was Senator Langford from Oklahoma, is that right?
Yes.
And in your opinion, I don't know the senator personally, but would you characterize him as a liberal Republican, a moderate, or does he have a reputation of being a conservative who's serious about border security?
I've met the senator on numerous occasions. He is a serious and thoughtful conservative, very conservative, and I think represents the positions and opinions of the people of his home state of Oklahoma very well.
Yeah, so you had a bipartisan plan to secure the border, negotiated by one of the most conservative senators in the United States Senate, supported by Republicans and Democrats, on its way to passage to secure the border, doing everything. And what happened?
So I was not privy to any secret phone calls, but as I understand it, candidate Trump asked both publicly but also mostly privately to delay that and to not have a vote on that bill so that it could preserve a political talking point for him.
That's exactly right. President Trump wanted to have a problem he could campaign on instead of having us do everything that we can to keep the American people safe. That is putting politics ahead of what is good for the country. That is putting partisanship ahead of keeping the American people safe. and it is despicable. And it wasn't just President Trump, it was his allies as well. I want to read a quote from Senator Langford, the Republican senator from Oklahoma, who said, quote, "A popular commentator threatened to destroy me if I negotiated the deal during the presidential election year, regardless of what was in it." So even if you disagreed with some of the things that were in that bipartisan plan, what Senator Langford was being told was, it doesn't even matter what's in the bill, kill it. The commentator said to Senator Langford, quote, this is from the senator, "I will do whatever I can to destroy you because I do not want you to solve this during the presidential election." I mean, my God. What are the American people supposed to make of that? The American people want us working together in a bipartisan way. They tried to do that in the Senate. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris tried to work with Senator Langford and other Republicans and Democrats to come up with a plan to secure the border. That's very different from what's been happening in this chamber. In this chamber, when our House Republican colleagues came out with their border bill, they didn't accept a single Democratic amendment. They dropped the language of the bill the night before the markup. They didn't take a single Democratic amendment in committee or on the floor. They passed a bad bill that had all kinds of things in it that didn't have anything to do with securing the border, things to ban electric vehicles at federal sites and deny funding to nonprofit organizations unless they conducted citizenship tests to people that they were serving, like crazy stuff. Rather than working together across the aisle on a real bipartisan plan like they did in the Senate, like the Biden-Harris administration tried to do before President Trump came in and killed it. So understand what's happening here. There are people in this Congress who are serious about solving the crisis at the border, who are serious about governing, and unfortunately, there are others who just take their marching orders from Donald Trump and put his political interests ahead of what is good for the country. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Magaziner. Mr. Crane, sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to clear something up. The reason that we were so intent on killing that bill was because, in case you guys don't remember, it would have allowed about 4,000 people in per day. That's a problem. It would have continued to fund the NGOs, I believe, that were also flying people, busing people all over the country. So there were a couple major non-starters right there for us. I know there's been a lot of talk on the other side about that bill and how fantastic it was. I just want to clear that up. Now I want to turn to Mr. Nowrasteh. Did I say that correctly, sir?
Nowrasteh.
Nowrasteh, okay. You said, sir, regarding foreign-born terrorist threats in the United States, it's a small and manageable threat. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Nowrasteh, do you know what a sleeper cell is, sir?
Yes.
Can you give a definition of what a sleeper cell is?
So it's a group of terrorists working together who are laying low for a long period of time in preparation for an attack that will be committed at some point in the future.
Yeah, that's actually pretty close. Good job, sir. You're a numbers guy, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now that we've covered what sleeper cells are, a group of terrorists or spies that are remaining inactive within a target population until ordered to act. And Mr. Healy gave us some great numbers earlier. Under the Trump administration, we had 14 individuals encountered at the southern border on the terror watch list. And under this administration, that number exceeds 380 at this point. Does that make you still stand by your statement that it is a small and manageable threat?
It is a threat above zero. It is definitely a threat, but it is still small and manageable, yes.
Okay. How about gotaways? How many gotaways have we had since this administration took office? People that didn't get encountered, didn't get arrested at the southern border.
So the estimates range, we talked earlier about 2 million. I believe Mr. Healy's estimate was up to 2.4. I've seen estimates as low as about 1.9, 1.8. It depends on the methods, but I think it's fair to say about 1.7 to 2.4 range is fair.
Yeah, Mr. Nowrasteh, knowing that, is there a possibility that any of those, let's say 1.5 to 2.5 million people that didn't get arrested, didn't get caught, snuck in through that southern border could have been either on the terrorist watch list or terrorists who aren't on a watch list?
It is certainly possible. The chance is absolutely above zero.
Are you aware that we have over 100 tunnels that CBP knows of going from Mexico into the United States of America?
I bet there are a lot more than that.
Yeah, yeah. We know of about 140 of them, but there's probably a lot more that we don't know about. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a consequence of black markets.
Do you think that could? Do you think those tunnels could be used as avenues to bring terrorists into this country?
It's certainly possible. We've never seen that. We have no evidence of that, but that is certainly possible that something like that could happen.
Okay. Mr. Healy, do you concur, do you agree with Mr. Nowrasteh's claim that it is a small and manageable threat?
No,
No?
I don't.
You were in the Marine Corps and then you were an FBI agent for a very long time, is that correct?
I was in the Marine Corps. I flew Harrier jump jets for 7 years, and I was an FBI agent for 27. I worked it. I was an undercover agent in it. I helped build the terrorist screening center initially. I was its first deputy director, and I was a director for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I lived it every day.
How many terrorists does it take to cause a mass casualty event?
One.
One?
One.
Yeah. How important do you think it is that we do everything possible to stop any attacks on U.S. soil, Mr. Healy?
We don't have the choice. We don't have the choice. That's not an option, period.
Do you think this administration is taking it seriously at all?
I have a problem when numbers go crazy from 2021 to 2024. It's unmanageable. I worked with the team, and I actually attended the Terrorist Screening Center Memorial a couple days, a week ago for 9/11. Those people work every single day, 24 hours a day. They can't leave.
Yeah.
It's unmanageable.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Crane. Mr. Swazi, sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me thank the witnesses for your time. Really appreciate you guys being here. Dr. Brown, Mr. Healy, Mr. Nowrasteh.
Nowrasteh.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your time. I know, this can be frustrating for you guys because, this is serious stuff to you as well, like it is for the American public. And it's difficult to listen to the back and forth sometimes. And it seems like, what are you guys doing? You're just fighting with each other. Why can't we just work together and try and address this problem? I want to associate myself with Mr. Crane's remarks because he's right. We got a serious problem with terrorists that we have to worry about. We should be worried about it, and we should do everything possible. I don't think there's any argument with that. I don't think there's anybody that could disagree. With both sides. I agree with a lot of stuff that's been said on both sides here. The crisis that we have in our country is not just the southern border. It's a crisis of Washington, D.C., that we're not actually putting aside the rhetoric and doing the work that's necessary to find common ground to get this done. And so I don't want to talk about former President Trump or President Biden or Kamala Harris or, all that stuff. We've got to do a few things. We've got to secure the border. And there were a lot of things in the Senate bill that were great. Mr. Crane didn't like the idea of the 4,000 a day or something. Maybe we shouldn't have anybody. You shouldn't apply for asylum in between the ports of entry. No number, just no asylum applications in between the ports of entry. The president's executive order lowered that number from 4,000 down to, I think, 1,500. But maybe it should be 0. And so people can apply for asylum. Asylum's an important part of America's history. Apply for asylum at safe mobility offices, which they're trying to do right now, but do it so you can apply in Guatemala, or you can apply in Colombia, or you can apply in somewhere in Europe or in Asia or another. Apply those places. Don't come to the southern border. Why subject these people to pay $10,000 to some criminal entity, subject themselves to this awful trek, subject themselves to rape or murder or pillaging, awful experiences, parents and children? Why not just have people apply in other places? Don't put the pressure on the southern border. And let's do all the other stuff that was good in the Senate bipartisan compromise. More judges, more border security, build some more wall, more technology, do all that stuff. But we got to stop this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And the people in America are like, what are you guys doing? This is real. Stop. Just work together and fix it. So we got to secure the border. We got to fix the asylum system that still respects the concept of asylum. You know, we used to applaud asylum in America. When someone defected from Russia, or from Soviet Union, I should say, we were like, yes, they're defecting. They're with us. They're not with them. They're being persecuted. We're going to help them. Well, there are still people being persecuted in the world. Asylum is a magnificent thing about America. But let's not make it so that people are using asylum because they've been coached by a coyote and abuse the system because they're just doing it for economic reasons, which we understand that. We have compassion for people doing it for economic reasons, but that's not the purpose of asylum. The purpose of asylum is you're being tortured or persecuted in your country for your political beliefs or something else about you, and you have nowhere else to go, and America is the beacon of light for the rest of the world. So let's keep asylum, but let's fix it from being abused right now. So secure the border, fix asylum, and then let's treat people like human beings. Let's find the areas that make sense, like a lot of the things that Mr. Nowrasteh was talking about, you know, that will improve our economy. The farm workers, there was a bipartisan farm workers bill. We got to get that back. Let's help the dreamers that have been here for 30 years, these kids that came here, they graduated from college, they're now in the military. I mean, they're now in college or they're working a full-time. Give them a break. Been here for 30, we're not going to send them back to a country they never knew since they came here. We invited people here because they had an earthquake or they had a civil war. We said, TPS, temporary protective, come to America. We'll take you in. We'll help you because of how awful it is in your country. Help those people. They've been here 20 or 30 years. Afghan readjustment, the people that Mr. Luttrell served with, you know, help them to come here. So let's stop the BS, and I'm not suggesting that you guys are doing BS at all. Let's figure out how can we do the things to secure our border, fix the asylum system while still respecting its history, and treat people like human beings. And let's give the American people what they want, because they don't want what I hear at a lot of these hearings that we have, which is just the back and forth, and you're one of those, and you're one of those, and blah, blah, blah. Let's work together, and let's actually make the world a better place to live in. So I'm sorry that I did all the talking. I didn't ask you any questions, but I appreciate your service, all of you, for spending the time, not only today, but devoting your lives to these public policy issues and helping to educate. I took the time to read your testimony, and I'm grateful to you for the work that you've all done. And let's work together and make things better. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Suozzi. Mr. D'Esposito, sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here this morning. Homeland Security stated in their 2024 Homeland Threat Assessment that, quote, terrorists and criminal actors may exploit the elevated flow and increasingly complex security environment to enter the United States. So let me put it another way. The Biden-Harris administration failed border policies have without a doubt caused a crisis at our southern border that allows, unfortunately, terrorists and criminals to slip into our nation and wreak havoc on American streets. From fiscal year 2021 to date, 378 individuals whose names appear on the known terror watch list were stopped trying to cross our southern border illegally. And these are just the ones that we know about. Just 24 hours ago, we had a hearing in this room where a former chief of the Border Patrol, I asked him, how much information do we have on the millions of known gotaways that have entered this country? His answer, zero. We have zero information on millions of people who have crossed into this country illegally. We don't know where they are. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know who they're associating with. And we don't know what they want to do to this country. You would honestly have to be blind to not to see the crisis that we are experiencing as a nation and the danger that this administration is putting every American in. And it's absolutely unacceptable. Mr. Healy, in your testimony, you stated, quote, in my experience, the numbers matter. And I agree, they do. Quote, 19 al-Qaeda terrorists on 4 commercial jetliners fundamentally altered our world forever changing our mindset in the aftermath of 9/11. In this landscape, a single terrorist act has the potential to impact millions of lives. Just last week, we commemorated the 23rd anniversary of the September 11th attacks. Communities that I represent on Long Island in New York lost hundreds of individuals that day. And unfortunately, we continue to lose people related to 9/11 illness. Both the NYPD and the FDNY, the numbers have nearly doubled of those that have died since 9/11 than on the actual day. When you hear some of the numbers that I mentioned related to our border, what are your initial thoughts?
Extreme concern, and it's outrageous because we didn't have to get here. This was preventable. This was preventable.
And what sort of threat do numbers like these pose to the United States of America?
An unknown, a known or suspected terrorist, unknown to the FBI, entering in the U.S. is a threat beyond I can comprehend. When you talk about one or two, it doesn't matter. The issue is that when you have one, that one everybody knows about, and the fear and possibilities of what they can do is incredible.
And Mr. Healy, you use the word, you pretty much can't comprehend it. And that's coming from someone who has spent his entire adult life in this world, in this business, protecting the United States of America. Would you agree that the large number of known gotaways, alongside the large number of individuals on the terrorist watch list trying to enter our nation, poses a threat to every state, every city, and every community in this country?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%.
And would you say that it poses an even bigger threat to people who live in communities like the surrounding communities or right in New York City, especially those with sanctuary city laws that incentivize people to come to their city?
I think it's a problem throughout our country right now, period.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, my time's almost expired.
Will the gentleman yield the balance of his time to the chair?
Absolutely.
Mr. Nowrasteh, you commented regarding positions for hiring in Border Patrol. Are you familiar with the number of positions that are currently open that because of morale and change of mission, the Biden administration, Secretary Mayorkas has been unable to fill? They can't get people to go to work for that man. You aware? So I could give you 100,000 more agents. But if you can't hire 500 Air and Marine agents, 1,300 CBP officers, and 1,700 Border Patrol agents, these are positions open right now. For years, they can't fill these slots. So go ahead. I'm giving permission to hire 100,000 more. You can't fill these slots. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Basheen is recognized for 5 minutes for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two different times, 2 different days in a row, Congressman Tom Suozzi from New York has said some things, and I'm excited where he's coming from in terms of him talking about the need to secure the border. I told him privately yesterday, I caught him on the floor. You know, he's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. I said, thank you. But because I see, you know, and he represents New York, and he just came through an election, and his constituency, just like Mr. D'Esposito, who also is a Republican, represents New York, my assumption is the reason why he is having these positions, he just went through a campaign, and he's hearing from enough New Yorkers who experienced 9/11 who are saying to him, this position that the Democrat Party has, you will not get elected if you don't see my concern. The average American knows we are in danger because of policies that are not securing our border. It reminds me how we've changed in the last 10 to 15 years when you had, United States Senator Joe Biden say, the reason I believe in physical barriers in 2006 is because of the drugs that they are shipping between the ports of entries. Then he gets elected president, says not another foot, and shuts down congressionally authorized, congressionally voted upon, signed into law, 200 miles of border wall construction. What is happening? It reminds me of the story of the husband and wife driving down the road, sitting on two opposite sides of the vehicle, seeing this 16-year-old couple maybe coming past them on the highway, and they're sitting together, maybe holding hands, and the wife looks over at the husband and says, "Sweetie, why don't we sit like that together anymore?" And he looks at her on the opposite end of the vehicle and says, "Well, I didn't go anywhere." I'm astounded that there are organizations that are advocating such amazing ideologies that say we don't need to have a secure border with physical barriers, when the current president said that as a United States Senator when Barack Obama had a 100-mile border wall built. When you have, in the course of an administration, 3.5 years, this administration, north of 350 people on the terrorist watch list that have come into this country, 100 of which they did not catch and release them because there's so many people coming across the southern border, we don't have the ability to vet them. 100 people released into this country on the terrorist watch list. In the entirety of Trump's time, you only had 15 or less in 4 years. I mentioned that, Mr. Healy. You said a while ago you had a 20-plus year career with the FBI. And you were involved with the Terrorist Screening Center. You helped build that. So I'm going to ask you a question. Have you seen, because Director Wray, under the Biden administration, said we're at a whole nother level, his quote, we're at a whole nother level of threat. That's under this administration. He's being correct. I commended him a few months ago, saying, thank you for at least sharing, because he works for under this administration. He's being courageous enough to step up his game and say, this is a threat because of what's happening. Have you ever seen this heightened threat level in 30 years in working for the FBI that we are today because of insane policies?
Never.
So I want to look to the gentleman. I wrote it down, Mr. Nowrasteh from the Cato Institute. Thank you. This long down the line in the order of those who get a chance to speak, I've heard you pronounce it a number of times at this point. Look, I've read some Cato things that I like. There are times in the past, until I started watching y'all on your border positions, I was a fan at times of Cato positions. I'm astounded at where Cato is trying to take this narrative. And why have you all moved so far to the position that you're at, where you don't see that the woman yesterday, daughter raped, was before this committee, rape after murder after murder, and we don't understand we have to do all the above to secure that southern border. And to what Trump is talking about, there are criminals being released. If you're a country and you want to get rid of a criminal population, go north, young man, go north is the mantra coming from many of these countries. And we have policies that are allowing this. Do you think we're safer than we were 3 years ago?
There has never been a terrorist attack committed by an illegal immigrant who entered illegally on U.S. soil in U.S. history. It has not happened. I think you should focus on real threats that have actually manifested.
Mr. Austin, can I interrupt you because I'm over time? I'll just say, you're saying it's never happened. You're saying it's never happened.
Yeah, an illegal immigrant has never
What will
been
you
attacked.
say when Director Wray is proved right and this threat has never happened, and it does happen?
I have a long list, 50 pages of predictions made about fear of terrorism happening, made going back decades. All of them have turned out to be wrong. I am sick and tired of this threat hyperinflation.
I'm going to wrap up, Mr.
Sick
Chairman.
and tired of it.
Let me ask you this. If it was a family member of yours that was raped and murdered or murdered by Trinidad Aragua, would that statement be different? That you say it's never happened?
We should focus 100% of our resources on security threats. We should take Border Patrol away from trying to stop workers trying to come in. We should legalize the flow of labor so we can focus on these. Of course, there are individuals who have committed crimes who are illegal immigrants. They should be punished, removed, incarcerated, and stopped, but we should focus on them.
The gentleman yields. I'll let the witness finish because he's sick and tired. All right. Fascinating interactions here today, both sides of the aisle, which you have participated in today, ladies and gentlemen, and what America has witnessed is solid American men and women on both sides of the aisle grappling with this issue. Clearly, what's happening is injurious to our country at the southern border, by any measure. Less of a measure from one witness, more of a measure from another. It's our job to determine, what can we do to work together to mitigate against injury to our country. And so I appreciate the ranking members of both subcommittees for joining us today. And I appreciate the staff that has worked hard to assemble this meeting and the panelists, because ultimately, regardless of our political affiliation, we are Americans. And we love and respect each other, and we're dedicated to serve our country. So I thank the witnesses for the valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittees may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask that the witnesses respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7 Delta, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, this hearing stands adjourned.